Hello, my name is Natasha Reichel, and I'm the Associate Curator of Southeast Asian Art here at the Asian Art Museum. Today I'm going to talk about some objects in the Southeast Asian galleries that are associated with power and prestige in Indonesia. I'm starting here with this wall of daggers, swords, and knives, which come from all across island Southeast Asia. They're displayed here both sheathed and unsheathed. The unsheathed blades point up as one might view them while holding, while the sheathed point down as they might appear tucked behind one's back in a man's formal outfit. Some believe that an unsheathed weapon should not be displayed pointing downward because the power of its blade might summon an earthquake. This is something we definitely want to avoid here in San Francisco. I have to admit straight off that I wasn't always a fan of these objects. Mostly because of my own ignorance, I saw them merely as weapons, and I didn't consider either their artistry or their complex roles in society. That all changed many years ago in the central Javanese city of Surakarta, or Solo as it is more commonly known, when I went to visit a maker of Indonesian traditional daggers, or as they're known in Indonesia, kris. I hailed a pedicab, and the driver took me through the tangled back alleys of the city, streets so narrow it's hard to imagine a car ever navigating them. We finally came to the workshop of the kris maker. In my ignorance, I had come to visit on a Friday, and by the time I arrived, the forge had closed so the workers could go to Friday prayers. But luckily, the pandey, or metalsmith, took pity on me and showed me around, letting me look at some of the blades that they had made. This one visit changed forever the way I view this material, primarily because it taught me how to really look at it. Most traditional kris consist of 4 or sometimes 5 main parts. These parts have different local names in many of the different regions throughout the archipelago where they were made. Most of the terms I may mention today are Javanese. The blade is the most important part of a kris, and both its shape and the patterning on the surface of the blade are particularly valued. Hundreds of shapes are mentioned in literature on the kris, as well as dozens of patterns, formed by the patination of the lighter nickel against the darker iron of the blade. Each part of the blade has a name, every tiny groove and extrusion. In this example from Sumatra, the curved blade is additionally encrusted with floral and foliage designs in gold. It is said that when the gold work extended along the length of the blade, as it does here, it was likely made for one of the royal courts. The Mndot is a hilt fitting, an ornamental ring or cup that is a transition between the blade and the hilt. These small objects can be ornately decorated with precious metals and gemstones. The sulut is a piece that forms a cap on the hilt. It's not found on all kris. The hilt is called the ukiran, a word stemming from the root word ukir, to carve. Hilts can be made from many different types of wood, from bone or ivory or metal. Royal krises could have hilts of precious materials like ivory, sperm whale tooth, walrus tusk, or gold encrusted with gems. Kris handles can range from abstract to figurative forms. This one, from Palembang, Sumatra, is anthropomorphic but not naturalistic. Many have the form of a stylized, crouching human. Hilts with figurative forms are especially common in Bali. This is a particularly fine example. Some figurative hilts from Bali depict royal figures, but many others depict a number of hard-to-identify demonic figures. These are sometimes referred to as Raksasa, a fierce supernatural being, but are also said to depict the wind god Bayu, who sometimes holds a jar of the elixir of immortality in his right hand. It's difficult to tell what the demonic figure on this handle is holding. His left hand seems to grasp a swath of cloth, perhaps a corner of one of his sashes. His right arm swings across his chest and clasps a segmented round object, framed by the elongated thumbnail of the figure's hand. Long, sharp fingernails, especially thumbnails, are associated with superhuman strength. Look closely at the detailed rendering of the demonic figure's beard and ornaments. The carver of this remarkable hilt used ornamental motifs commonly found on Balinese temples, including the stylized bird face on the clasp at the figure's waist and the one-eyed monster face on the back of the figure's headdress, as well as the overall abundance of plant ornamentation. Krises have long played important roles in Balinese society, and in pre-colonial Bali, most men possessed at least one. They were weapons that could be used in hand-to-hand warfare, but also were and still are markers of status, sacred heirlooms, and spiritually powerful objects. Another Balinese hilt in the collection, shown here, has the form of a chrysalis, a creature in transformation. A hilt like this would be appropriate for a prince. The final part of a kris is the sheath, called a rangka, or in some places called a sarang, like the sarang that wraps the body of a person. A sheath must be strong not only to protect the kris from physical damage, but also to contain the spiritual power of the blade it envelops. Of particular value were sheaths like this one, made of spalted wood. This wood comes from a tree which has had fungal growth that stains parts of the wood darker, leading to a spotted or striped pattern. This other sheath is encased in gold, with foliage patterns and semi-precious gemstones. At the top, a variation of the internal knot pattern, and at the bottom, a golden naga. The valuable materials, as well as the blade of this kris, with a high number of curves, 13, indicates that it was likely a royal kris. A single kris can sometimes have a blade made in one place and a mndot or hilt in another, and a true expert can identify the many regional differences in the hilts and blades across the archipelago. That being said, we have also had experts with differing opinions about our collection. I'm very much a beginner in learning about these artworks. Many of the identifications in our collection come from the help of Gerrit Saljum. Throughout the world, blacksmiths have often been considered specially powerful people who took ores from the earth and, using dangerous methods of working with fire, produced objects both practical and beautiful through a kind of alchemy. The word for blacksmith, pandai, also means clever. Great kris makers are given the title empu, a word also used for great sages and poets. We do not know when the first kris were made in Indonesia. A relief from the 9th century temple at Borobudur seems to depict one. A temple from the 15th century called Candi Suku has a remarkable relief showing a kris maker's workshop. On the far right, a worker pushes air through the bellows, while on the left, a kris maker holds a blade above his knee and seems ready to hammer it with his bare hand. Early photographs of Java show kris workshops that look remarkably similar to this, but without the dancing elephant. The second forge I visited was in the compound of Gotik Swan, or by his Indonesian name, Arti Harjonegoro, an Indonesian of Chinese heritage who was very well known for his knowledge of Javanese culture and for his role in helping revive the batik industry in central Java. His compound in Solo had areas for producing both batik and for making traditional daggers. After my visit, as I was leaving, he gave me a brooch with a black center stone. When I asked what it was, he said it was made of meteorite, and that the metal from meteorites, a mixture of iron and nickel, was what was used to make the most powerful krises. The blades of these kris would contain metal from both earth and sky. And indeed, in the late 18th century, a large meteorite had fallen in central Java and broken into pieces. A large piece still stands in its own pavilion in the court at Surakarta. Pieces from the meteorite were used to make krises. The process of making a blade involves the repeated folding and layering of iron, with either iron containing nickel from meteorites or nickel mined from the ground layered in. The way the iron is folded, twisted, gouged, and manipulated can create striking patterns. After the blade has been finished, the surface is treated to bring out the patination by oxidizing the iron, leaving the nickel brighter and more silver-colored. This patination is called pamor in Indonesian, and there are many specific names for different patterns that can be produced. Some examples in our collection include this blade from Madura, the small island to the northeast of Java, which has a delicate pattern called miring, indicating diagonal lines. This next kris has a pamor or surface pattern known as adeg sapu, standing broom. This Javanese blade has a pattern called golden rain. Kris are stored carefully, and there are often rituals for their care that can include offerings. In Java, special painted boards were made to hold kris. This example, not on view, depicts a figure painted in the stylized, elongated form of Javanese wayang, or shadow puppets. In Bali, special carved statues were made as kris holders. They took the form of both animals and humans. This one is in the shape of a demonic figure, who is well adorned with jewelry and textiles. Facing the statue, on the sheath of the kris, are delicately painted images of figures also in the wayang tradition. An old Javanese saying tells of the 5 things all men should have: a house, a wife, a horse, a singing bird, and a kris. Early accounts of visitors to Java recount that kris were very common. A Chinese visitor in the 15th century wrote, "All men in Majapahit, from the king to the commoners, from a boy aged 3 to elders, slipped a kris in their belts." The daggers are made entirely of steel, with intricate motifs smoothly drawn. The handles are made of gold, rhino's horn, or ivory carved with a depiction of human or demon. The carving works are exquisite and skillfully made. Today, kris are not worn as often, but one can still see them at the courts of central Java and at ceremonial occasions like weddings. They are considered heirlooms and are still highly valued as regalia in the royal courts. Many believe that kris can have supernatural powers, like the ability to move on their own or to seek out and injure enemies. Indonesian tales describe the necessity for the kris to fit its owner and the dangers of owning a kris whose powers are too strong. Undoubtedly, part of the power ascribed to the kris derived from the mysteries of their production. Smiths had special status in ancient Indonesia, and in Bali they have their own clan group called Pandey, who claim in their sacred texts a status higher than the highest caste of Brahmins. The makers of kris have status, and a kris can bestow status on its owner. In many traditional societies in island Southeast Asia, metal from weapons or from jewelry would form a counterpart to textiles, and during weddings the two would be exchanged between the groom and bride's families. The women's art of weaving also brought status to the maker and bestowed it upon the wearer. To hear more about that, stay tuned for our textile exhibition later this year.